Thank you very much from a freezing cold Johannesburg. Okay. Colleagues, I'll try and be quick because you've been going for a long time. I had thought that someone would use the Gramsci quote because the crisis does seem to have a great variety of morbid symptoms, but none of us are quite clear on what the crisis is. And I'm not sure COVID is necessarily either the crisis or the symptom, despite its obvious morbidity. But I think what we're witnessing, and you've all seen this in your media all over the world, there's a whole series of crises that are coming together. Racism being an obvious one, not just through Black Lives Matter. There are different struggles in different parts of the world, but that obviously is a huge one. Global inequality, the ongoing subjugation of the global South, the environmental crisis, which is central to what you'll be doing in the groups, racialized, gendered inequality that has run through countries, cities, and the global economy. These are all very clear symptoms of a very powerful old order that can be changed. And the question is, will it? I think some of the questions at the end are turning to how will it, and in whose interest? You know, this new order that emerges after COVID, what will it be? Because it's fairly obvious that you can go left or you can go right. There's no guarantee that we won't end up in a much more authoritarian world or potentially a more liberal and open one. I think COVID has shown that the state, as it says there, is not monolithic. I think subnational entities, whether they're cities or whatever you have in your country, districts, provinces, and so on, they have power and agency. They also have their own problems of rent seeking, most obviously. But they can act more quickly and more responsively to citizens at grassroots level. And so in terms of the Gramsci quotes, human rights, environment, climate change, pro-poor governance, all the things you're talking about are all needing to be born, in other words, to be realized in practice, but they have very powerful enemies. And so we've heard talk about civil unrest, which has particular connotations here in South Africa, but it could also be a fairly profound political realignment that we're looking at because of this intertwined nature of all these different things happening all at once. So very briefly, I think it's, everyone tells us, oh, COVID has shown us the ugly underbelly of the city. And it has, and I'm talking to us, when I say us, I mean everyone who's watching this, because most of us who are watching this are middle-class professionals. We're academics, we're planners, we're lawyers. I'm not a lawyer, you may have gathered that. And if you live in where I live, places in the South, if we didn't design these cities, then the colonial authorities designed them for us. But they're designed for us. Cities are designed primarily for the middle class and the elite. We all knew that we had slums, townships, favelas. We knew that. But the question is, what are we going to be doing after COVID? And it's the rebuild question that was being asked. How do you inject ethical concerns into city planning and building, into law and so on? And one of those parts of those answers is integration, including for our network, is not to put human rights in a different pocket from governance, in a different pocket from the climate and so on, but to work with them all at the same time. Sorry, I'm trying to make this move. And I think part of it is maybe clearer, and certainly the presentation from Brazil was talking very much to this kind of argument, but governance is about power. It's not just about the rules of the game and how efficiently you deliver services. So it's about who's got power, who hasn't got power, who's denied and is deliberately shut out of it, who has a voice, who's ignored. We know that in most cases, that's the poor, and the poor are not listened to, which is why cities are such breeding grounds politically, epidemiologically, and every other way. And so when we talk about solidarity, and I think almost everyone has mentioned it in one way or another, we have to balance that against human nature, because all of us have seen in all of our societies massive corruption around COVID, around things, which has also been mentioned in presentations, obviously. In other words, life-saving equipment is worth stealing and selling so that I get more money than someone else. And solidarity, in other words, needs to be massaged and comforted and developed. It doesn't happen because it's the right thing to do. I make the sarcastic comment that lawyers always get thrown at them, which is that people can't eat human rights. But it's true. And we locked the poor down and we didn't feed them. And then we allowed them to infect each other. And then we said, oh gosh, it must be the city's problem. It's not our problem, it's the city's problem. And I do think when you do that to a group of people, whether they're racialized or ethnicized, or it's because of their religion, or simply because of their poverty, you do get serious political ruptures. So I don't think the problem is cityness, you know, the fact of there being cities. It's using a city to hardcrete inequality into the landscape and ensure that the poor stay poor. The poor are where they are meant to be, and they stay there. They can't socially distance, they can't access private healthcare, as you and I may be able to, and they can't eat. In other words, it's how we run our cities. It's not the fact of a city, because I think one of the presenters was saying, is this the end of the city? And I also don't think it's Florida's, oh, everything will bounce back and it'll all be fine. We have to ask what we run our cities for. It's either for us or it's for greater economic benefit. If it's the latter, then the old order will certainly remain, and these morbid symptoms will be gone. And I do think that the subnational government, which is the last point there, is very flexible and important and should be used far more in this particular intertwined set of crises that we're sitting with right now. So the last slide, Chair, and I apologize for 3 slides of final words. Firstly, knee-jerk responses to crises are generally not very good ones. So if the argument is density makes social distancing difficult, de-densify the city cannot be the response. It's what someone said, make decent living spaces for everyone. It doesn't mean get rid of cities. It means actually live up to what we say cities are there for. Build cities for decent lives, not changing the trendy slogan, which will change every year as these various international bodies come up with smart cities and all these other different cities that we're supposed to be looking for. And let the poor have their voice in determining what are the standards for a minimally good city life, which is very different from in many people's minds from a rural life, for example. I think the equitable distribution of key goods has been talked about a lot, and I think it's absolutely central. But in health, it's often challenging because it's a national competence. In other words, it's run by the central government, and at best it goes down to province, district, whatever you have. But cities very rarely have the chance to do more than run clinics. And I think that may be something we need to watch. I would be wary, coming from where I am in Johannesburg, of the repeated use of the word citizen. It does have an exclusion built into it, which is anyone who is a resident in Johannesburg, I'm using my city as the example, who pays her or his taxes in Johannesburg but is not a citizen, is easily blamed and othered. Not just for, I mean, COVID right now, but for all sorts of other ills. You took the job that, it's my job that you've taken, it's my house that you've taken, and so on. We saw the long kilometers of Muslim migrant non-citizens, in quotation marks, being forced out of Delhi when COVID hit and so on. So I'm just saying the language we use, we need to be very careful about playing into these kinds of lines of division that are cutting through us. And I apologize for, you can see I've been typing while you've been talking. Do we want these cities of ours to bounce back in the shape they were in before COVID? I certainly hope not, at least speaking from Johannesburg. And my very last point, right now, all the vaccine trials, and we're involved in one of them here, the American government and a number of European governments have already bought in advance, on risk, all vaccines that will come from those trials. What you're doing is you're saying lives in the North matter more than lives in the South because we've got money in the North, and so we're going to buy it. And if global health equity is not the core principle that comes into play when the vaccine is eventually developed, then I think we are going to not simply stay where we are, but take many, many steps backwards. And I would really not want to be around then. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best in your working sessions.
Thank you, Professor. David Everatt. Apologies for not recognizing and introducing you before. Yes. I just want to note that you're a professor of governance from the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg.